My son
You have
looked me
no
dead in the
idea
eyes
what you've
across
done to
the
this
dinner table
family.
and said,
You're a selfish woman, and
"You're
I can't
old
forgive you."
and worthless if you're not
You can't
helping
just
this family
dismiss my
anymore."
feelings like that.
The room
Grandma?
went silent.
What's happening?
My granddaughter froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My daughter-in-law stared down at her wine glass like she hadn't heard a thing. And I just sat there, feeling something inside me finally break after years of paying their bills, raising their children, and sacrificing my own life to keep theirs comfortable. What Ethan didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had qualified for early retirement, and every single dollar I had was about to disappear from his reach. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever done everything for someone, only to realize they only valued what you could give them? If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there tonight. Sometimes it helps to know we're not listening alone. People love to talk about the sacrifices mothers make as if sacrifice is some beautiful thing, like it's noble, like it automatically turns into love returned. But nobody warns you what happens when sacrifice becomes expectation. When the people you nearly destroy yourself for slowly stop seeing you as a person at all. My name is Londyn Harrison. I'm 62 years old, and until recently, I thought being needed meant being loved. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in the same brick house my husband Marcus and I bought 36 years ago when Ethan was still in diapers. The kitchen still has the pale yellow cabinets Marcus painted himself one summer, because I'd once mentioned they reminded me of my grandmother's house in Georgia. Marcus remembered little things like that. That man loved me carefully. He died 8 years ago on a cold November morning after suffering a massive heart attack while shoveling snow from our driveway. One minute, I was handing him coffee in his travel mug, teasing him about refusing to hire the neighborhood boys to shovel for him. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in an emergency room hearing words that didn't feel real. We did everything we could. After Marcus died, the silence in this house nearly swallowed me whole. Ethan was all I had left. My son was 34 back then. Newly married to Vanessa Brooks, ambitious, charming, always chasing the next promotion or business opportunity. He cried harder than I did at Marcus's funeral. Held my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. "I'll take care of you now, Mom," he whispered. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. At first, helping Ethan and Vanessa felt natural, loving, necessary. When they struggled with Ethan's student loans, I helped with a few payments. When Vanessa got pregnant with Mia and had complications that forced her onto unpaid leave early, I quietly paid their electric bill for 3 months. When they found a bigger house in Dublin, one they honestly couldn't afford. Yet Ethan called me late one night, sounding embarrassed. "Mom, I hate asking, but we're short on the down payment." I remember standing in my bedroom holding Marcus's old watch in my hand while Ethan talked. I could almost hear my husband warning me not to give too much too fast. But Ethan was my son, so I gave them $20,000 from Marcus's life insurance savings. Ethan cried. Vanessa cried. They promised they'd pay me back someday. I told them not to worry about it. That was my first mistake. Because after that, the requests stopped sounding like requests. They became assumptions. When Mia was born 13 years ago, I started babysitting 3 days a week to help with daycare costs. Then Jacob came along 4 years later, and somehow 3 days became every weekday. At first, Ethan used to ask politely, "Would you mind helping tomorrow?" Eventually it became, "We'll drop the kids off at 7. No question mark attached. I was still working then, too. I spent 35 years as a financial manager at Riverside Community Hospital. Numbers made sense to me. Systems made sense to me. I handled budgets worth millions of dollars without blinking. Yet somehow, I couldn't see what was happening inside my own family. Or maybe I refused to see it. Every morning, I drove 25 minutes to Ethan's house before work. I packed lunches, tied shoes, cleaned, spilled cereal, drove Mia to piano lessons, drove Jacob to baseball practice, then rushed to the hospital for my own job. At night, I often returned to Ethan's house after work to help with dinner, because Vanessa said she was exhausted. Sometimes I wouldn't get home until almost 10. I told myself I was blessed to be close to my grandchildren. And I was. Mia has Marcus's eyes, soft brown, thoughtful, observant. Jacob inherited Ethan's crooked grin from when he was little, before life hardened something inside him. Those children were never the problem. The adults were. The first time I felt it clearly was 2 years ago during Thanksgiving. Vanessa handed me a handwritten list while I was washing dishes. Groceries, dry cleaning, picking up Jacob from school Friday, dropping Mia at dance class Saturday morning. There wasn't even a please. I stared at the paper for a long moment before asking softly, "Vanessa, did Ethan ask if I was free this weekend?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "Well, you usually are." Usually, like my life existed in the waiting spaces between their needs. I should have said something then. But instead, I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse like it was normal. That's the thing about emotional exhaustion. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens so slowly you start adjusting to disrespect before you even realize you're being disrespected. And Ethan, my sweet little boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a caterpillar, became someone I barely recognized. He started interrupting me constantly, correcting me in front of people, rolling his eyes when I spoke too long. One evening, I overheard him telling Jacob Grandma worries too much because she doesn't really have anything else going on. I stood frozen in the hallway holding a basket of folded laundry while those words settled into my chest like stones. Not long after that, I heard Vanessa say something even worse. I had come over early one morning because Mia forgot her science project at my house. Vanessa was in the kitchen talking on speakerphone with a friend, while I stood unseen near the front hallway. I still remember every word. Honestly, Vanessa laughed softly. "London's useful, at least for now. For now." I don't know why those 3 words hurt more than everything else combined. Maybe because, deep down, I already knew what would happen the moment I stopped being useful. Still, I kept helping, because lonely people will tolerate almost anything to keep feeling needed. Then came the lie that finally cracked something open inside me. Last spring, Ethan called saying they had a roofing emergency after a storm. He sounded panicked, said insurance wouldn't cover everything. "We just need $4,000 to get through this, Mom." I transferred the money within an hour. 3 weeks later, Mia accidentally showed me photos on her iPad from a luxury resort in Florida. Beach dinners, jet skis, oceanfront balconies. The timestamp matched the exact week Ethan claimed they were dealing with roof repairs. When I confronted him gently, he sighed like I was the problem. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We deserved a break. A break. Using my dead husband's savings." That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at Marcus's empty chair for a very long time. And for the first time since he died, I wondered if I had failed our son completely. After Ethan lied to me about the roof money, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. Funny how betrayal sharpens your vision. Suddenly, I saw every designer handbag Vanessa carried, every expensive steakhouse dinner Ethan posted online, every unnecessary gadget delivered to their front porch while they continued sighing dramatically over financial stress. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the entitlement. One Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at their house to pick up Jacob for baseball practice and found 3 large shopping bags sitting on the kitchen island. Vanessa walked in wearing sunglasses pushed up into her blonde hair, smiling at her phone. "Oh, good you're here," she said without looking up. "Can you steam these before Saturday?" They wrinkled in the car. I stared at the bags. Inside were dresses, expensive ones, still carrying boutique tags. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. But Vanessa simply grabbed an iced coffee from the counter and walked upstairs. No thank you. No asking. Just expectation. That same evening, I drove Jacob to practice while trying to calm the tightness building in my chest. He chatted happily from the back seat about school and baseball cards, while I nodded at red lights pretending everything felt normal. Children always sense tension, even when adults think they're hiding it. Halfway through the drive, Jacob suddenly asked Grandma, "Why don't you ever rest?" I glanced at him through the mirror. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You're always doing stuff for everybody." The innocence in his voice nearly broke me. I forced a smile. "That's what grandmas do." But even as I said it, something inside me whispered, "No, Londyn. That's what exhausted women say when they've forgotten how to say no." By the time summer arrived, my life revolved around Ethan's household more than my own. I bought groceries every Sunday because Vanessa claimed prices were out of control. I paid for Mia's piano lessons because Ethan insisted extracurriculars were important for college applications. I covered Jacob's baseball registration fee because Ethan had unexpected expenses that month. Unexpected expenses always seemed to happen right after vacations, new electronics, or nights out with friends. Still, I kept helping. Partly because I loved those children. Partly because, after Marcus died, being needed became the only thing keeping loneliness from swallowing me whole. The hardest nights were Sundays. That used to be Marcus's favorite day. He'd grill ribs in the backyard, while old jazz records played through the kitchen window. Ethan would toss footballs across the grass while I made potato salad inside. Now Sundays meant exhaustion. I'd come home from Ethan's house carrying empty casserole dishes and dirty laundry Vanessa forgot to wash. My knees ached constantly. My blood pressure had started creeping higher. Some nights, I fell asleep in my recliner still wearing my shoes. And nobody noticed. Or maybe they noticed and simply didn't care. One evening, my best friend Gloria Bennett stopped by unexpectedly after work. Gloria and I had worked together at Riverside Community Hospital for almost 20 years. She knew me too well to miss the dark circles under my eyes. "Londyn," she said carefully while sitting at my kitchen table. "When's the last time you did something for yourself?" I laughed softly. "I went to Costco alone last month." "Does that count?" She didn't laugh back. "That bad, huh? You look tired," Gloria admitted. Not normal tired, soul tired. I tried brushing it off, but the truth was sitting heavily inside me these days. So I finally told her everything. The money, the constant demands, the Florida trip, Vanessa's comment, Ethan treating me like free labor. Gloria listened quietly, stirring cream into her coffee long after it dissolved. Then she asked something simple that I couldn't stop thinking about afterward. "When exactly did your son stop seeing you as his mother?" I opened my mouth to answer. But nothing came out. Because I didn't know. Maybe it happened slowly. Maybe every time I rescued Ethan from consequences, I taught him my boundaries didn't matter. Maybe every sacrifice became proof that I'd continue sacrificing forever. A week later, Ethan called while I was still at work. "Mom, can you come by tonight?" His voice carried that familiar fake sweetness he used whenever he wanted something. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. We just need a little help." We. Always we. I arrived around 6:30. Vanessa was upstairs bathing Jacob, and Mia sat at the dining table doing homework. Ethan paced near the kitchen island, holding his phone. "We've hit a rough patch," he began immediately. I stayed standing. "What kind of rough patch?" He sighed dramatically. "Mortgage went up. Car payments killing us. Credit cards are tight." I noticed he avoided eye contact while speaking. "How much do you need? Just enough to get ahead again?" That wasn't a number. "Ethan." He rubbed his forehead. Maybe 2,000. I stared at my son, at his expensive watch, at the brand new television mounted on the wall behind him, at the untouched Amazon boxes stacked near the staircase. And for the first time in my life, irritation rose faster than guilt. "You just got back from Nashville," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "That was work-related. Mia told me you stayed at a spa resort." He gave an exaggerated sigh, already annoyed I wasn't cooperating properly. "Mom, seriously? Are we doing this? Doing this?" Meaning questioning him. Meaning behaving like my money belonged to me instead of him. "I just want to understand why you need help every month," I said softly. That's when Ethan's entire face changed. Not explosive anger. Worse, condescension. "You wouldn't understand how expensive life is now." I felt something cold move through my stomach. "Excuse me. You bought this house 36 years ago, Mom? Things are different now." I looked around the kitchen I had practically financed. The granite countertops I helped pay for. The refrigerator stocked with groceries I bought. The children upstairs I practically helped raise. And suddenly I realized Ethan truly believed I owed him this life. Not because he was grateful, because he believed he deserved it. I handed him a check anyway. $2,000. My fingers shook while signing it. Not because I couldn't afford it. Because deep down, I knew I was helping destroy my own son. That night, after I got home, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for a very long time. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My silver curls were thinner than they used to be. The lines around my mouth had deepened over the years. My shoulders looked permanently tense, as though I'd spent too long carrying things never meant for one person alone. Then I remembered something Marcus once told me during a difficult year when Ethan was a teenager. "If we keep protecting him from every hard lesson Marcus said, he'll grow into a man who thinks the world owes him comfort." Back then, I thought Marcus was being too strict. Now I wondered if he'd seen the future long before I did. Because somewhere along the way, my son stopped loving sacrifice and started depending on it. The strange thing about waking up emotionally is that once you finally see the truth, you can't unsee it again. After years of pushing aside my own instincts, I suddenly noticed everything. The exhaustion, the manipulation, the way my phone would light up with Ethan's name and immediately fill me with dread instead of joy. I started avoiding mirrors because I looked older than 62. Not naturally older. Worn down older. Like life had been slowly sanding pieces off me for years. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Gloria Bennett cornered me in the hospital break room during lunch. "You need to retire," she said bluntly. I nearly laughed coffee through my nose. With what money? Gloria stared at me over the rim of her glasses. "Londyn, you've worked here 35 years. You have retirement benefits most people would kill for." I shook my head automatically. I can't afford to stop working, but even saying the words felt dishonest somehow. Gloria lowered her voice. "Or is it that other people can't afford for you to stop working?" That sentence followed me home like a ghost. That night after dinner, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by folders I hadn't opened in years. Marcus used to organize everything meticulously. Insurance papers, investments, retirement accounts, mortgage records, tax returns. Every folder labeled in his neat handwriting. I ran my fingers over his name on one of the tabs and suddenly missed him so badly it physically hurt. "Okay, Marcus," I whispered into the empty kitchen. "Help me understand what I've ignored." For the next 3 hours, I went through every financial document I owned, and little by little, the truth emerged. I wasn't struggling financially. I was bleeding financially. There's a difference. My salary at Riverside Community Hospital had always been solid. Marcus's life insurance payout still existed, though smaller now after years of helping Ethan. We owned this house outright. I had a healthy 401k pension eligibility savings accounts and several old healthcare investments Marcus bought decades ago that had quietly grown in value. For years I'd convinced myself retirement wasn't possible. But according to the numbers sitting in front of me, retirement wasn't just possible, it was overdue. The realization should have made me feel relieved. Instead, panic hit me first. Because if I retired, who would pay for Ethan's emergencies? Who would babysit Jacob after school? Who would help Mia with piano fees? Who would cover the constant, unexpected expenses? I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. And for the first time, I asked myself a terrifying question. What if my son's entire lifestyle depended on my exhaustion? The next morning, I made an appointment with a financial advisor Gloria recommended named Daniel Kim. Walking into his office felt oddly embarrassing, like I was confessing failure instead of seeking guidance. Daniel looked younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe. Calm voice, sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. After reviewing my paperwork for nearly an hour, he finally looked up. "Mrs. Harrison?" he said carefully. "You're in a stronger position than you think." I let out a small, nervous laugh. "That's hard to believe lately," he nodded sympathetically. "You could retire comfortably right now if you reduced unnecessary outflows." Outflows, such a clean financial word for emotional damage. Daniel clicked a pen thoughtfully against the desk. "Can I ask something personal?" I hesitated. "Sure. Why are you financially supporting your adult son to this extent?" I immediately rushed to defend Ethan. "He has children. Things are expensive." "The economy?" Daniel raised a gentle hand. "I'm not judging you. I'm asking whether this support is sustainable." I fell silent, because deep down, I already knew the answer. Then Daniel asked the question that cracked something open inside me. "Are you funding your retirement?" he asked softly. "Or are you funding your son's lifestyle?" I couldn't speak. My throat burned suddenly, because nobody had ever said it that plainly before. Not Gloria, not Marcus, not even myself. Daniel turned his computer screen toward me. Charts, numbers, retirement projections, savings depletion timelines. I stared at a graph showing how quickly my financial cushion would disappear if I continued supporting Ethan at the current rate. 5 years, maybe less if medical issues arose later in life. And suddenly, I saw my future clearly. Not peaceful retirement, not traveling, not painting classes, not mornings with coffee beside Lake Erie like Marcus and I once dreamed about. No. I saw myself at 75 still paying someone else's bills while quietly pretending it was love. My chest tightened. "I think I made a terrible mistake," I whispered. Daniel's expression softened. "No," he said gently. "I think you loved your family. Somehow that hurt even more." Before leaving, Daniel suggested we review every account tied to my name, including liabilities and co-signed loans. I almost waved the suggestion away. Then something nagged at me. "There is one thing," I admitted slowly. "A few years ago, Ethan asked me to help with home renovations." Daniel looked up immediately. "Co-signed, I think so." "You think so?" My stomach twisted. By the end of that afternoon, Daniel had uncovered something that made my hands go cold. My name wasn't just attached casually to Ethan's renovation loan. I was legally responsible for it. Completely. If Ethan defaulted, the bank could come after me directly. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. "He told me this was temporary," I whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened, slightly professional, but concerned. "What's the remaining balance?" When he told me the number, I nearly stopped breathing. It was far larger than Ethan originally claimed. Far larger. And suddenly, dozens of moments from the past few years started rearranging themselves inside my mind. The constant financial pressure, the panic whenever I mentioned slowing down at work, the subtle guilt trips anytime I discussed retirement. Ethan didn't just appreciate my help. He depended on my income surviving indefinitely. I drove home in silence that evening through heavy Ohio rain. Windshield wipers moved back and forth while my thoughts spiraled harder with every mile. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my chest felt hollow. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same. Marcus's reading glasses still sat beside his recliner. The clock above the stove still ticked too loudly. The family photos still smiled back at me from the hallway wall. But I felt different, like some illusion had shattered permanently. I walked into Marcus's old study and opened the bottom drawer of his desk, where he kept personal letters and keepsakes. At the very back sat a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. I remembered it instantly. Marcus gave it to me shortly before his heart surgery years ago, telling me only to open it when life gets heavy. My fingers trembled, opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. Londyn. If you're reading this, it probably means you're carrying too much again. You have the kindest heart of anyone I've ever known. But kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Promise me something. Don't spend your final years saving people who refuse to save themselves. You deserve peace too. Love. Always, Marcus. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word on the page. I sat there in the quiet study, clutching that letter against my chest. And for the first time in years, I seriously considered choosing myself. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Sunday. Of course it did. Sundays had always belonged to family in our house. Even after Marcus died, I tried keeping that tradition alive. Pot roast in the oven. Warm rolls wrapped in kitchen towels. Candles lit even when nobody noticed them anymore. I arrived at Ethan and Vanessa's house around 4:30, carrying a peach cobbler Mia loved. Jacob ran to hug me first. Grandma Dad burned the garlic bread again. His grin made me laugh despite the heaviness I'd been carrying for weeks. Mia appeared more slowly from the hallway, tall and thoughtful now at 13. She kissed my cheek and quietly took the cobbler dish from my hands. "You look tired," she whispered. Children always see more than adults realize. "I'm okay, sweetheart." But I wasn't, not even close. Dinner started normally enough. Vanessa talked about a neighborhood fundraiser. Ethan complained about work politics. Jacob spilled milk. Mia rolled her eyes at her little brother. Ordinary family noise. Yet underneath it all, I felt tension pressing against my skin like static before a storm. Ethan kept glancing at Vanessa. Vanessa kept sipping wine too quickly. Something was coming. I knew it. After dinner plates were cleared, Ethan leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together like a businessman preparing for negotiations. That alone made my stomach tighten. "Mom," he began smoothly, "Vanessa and I have been talking about the future." There it was, the tone, the rehearsed calmness. I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Okay." Vanessa smiled too brightly. "We've just been worried about you being alone in that big house. Concern. That's how manipulation always introduces itself." "I'm fine in my house," I replied gently. "Sure for now," Ethan said quickly. "But eventually it's going to become too much." Too much. Funny how everyone suddenly becomes an expert on aging the moment your usefulness starts inconveniencing them. I stayed quiet while Ethan continued. "We actually think we found a solution that helps everybody." Everybody. Another word I'd grown to distrust. Vanessa reached across the table and touched my hand. The gesture felt strangely performative. "What if you sold your house and moved in with us?" For a moment, I honestly thought I misunderstood her. I'm sorry. Ethan leaned forward eagerly now that the conversation had begun. We could finish the basement beautifully for you, like a private apartment. Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. You'd have family around all the time. And honestly, it would help all of us financially. There it was. Finally, the truth sitting naked on the table between the dinner dishes. I felt my pulse slow instead of speed up. A strange calm settled over me. How would it help financially? I asked carefully. Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa before answering. Well, if you sold your house, there'd be a lot of equity there. Equity, not memories, not Marcus, not the garden we planted together, not the doorway where Ethan measured his height every birthday. Equity. Vanessa jumped in quickly. And you wouldn't have expenses anymore. We could combine resources as a family. Combine resources. I stared at the two of them sitting across from me. Suddenly, every conversation from the past few years rearranged itself in my head. Every guilty sigh when I mentioned retirement. Every complaint about mortgage payments. Every subtle reminder that I was alone. This wasn't concern. This was planning. How much money do you think I'd make selling my house? I asked quietly. Ethan shrugged too casually. A few $100,000 probably. Probably. Like he'd already calculated it. You could help us pay down the mortgage, Vanessa added carefully. And honestly, it just makes sense long term. I looked around the dining room. Mia had gone completely still. Jacob was staring at his plate. Even the children sensed something ugly happening. And what exactly would I do living here, I asked. Ethan laughed lightly, missing the danger in my tone. Well, you already help with the kids. This would just make things easier. Easier for whom, I wanted to ask it. Instead, I asked something else. Would I still have my own life? The silence after that question lasted too long. Vanessa recovered first. Of course, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew. In their minds, my future had already been decided. I wasn't a mother anymore. I wasn't even really a person. I was a financial solution, a live-in nanny with retirement funds. A woman slowly being absorbed into someone else's life until nothing remained of her own. Something cold and painful opened inside my chest. I thought about Marcus's letter hidden in my purse upstairs. You deserve peace too. Ethan misread my silence completely. Mom, let's be realistic here, he said, impatience creeping into his voice. What exactly are you holding on to that house for? My fingers tightened around my napkin. That house is my home. It's just a building. No. It was the last place Marcus ever laughed. The last place he ever kissed me goodbye. The last place I still felt pieces of my old life breathing in the walls. But Ethan didn't see any of that. Because Ethan only saw value in things that could be spent. Vanessa tried softening the conversation. We just think it's selfish to isolate yourself when family could benefit too. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. After everything I had given them. The years. The money. The exhaustion. The grief I buried so I could keep carrying everyone else. Selfish. I looked at my son carefully. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I saw not stress or immaturity. I saw entitlement. Deep-rooted entitlement. Ethan sighed heavily, clearly frustrated I wasn't immediately agreeing. Mom, you're retired basically anyway. I still work. Part-time, I still work. He rubbed his forehead dramatically. You don't need all that money at this stage of your life. There it was again. Not your money. Our money. Future inheritance. Accessible resource. I felt something inside me finally begin to harden. Not hatred. Something sadder. Clarity. I'm not selling my house, I said calmly. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. Ethan blinked. What I said, no. His entire posture changed. The warmth vanished from his face so quickly it startled even me. Why, he demanded. Because I don't want to. That's not a real reason. A dangerous silence filled the room. Mia whispered, Dad. But Ethan kept going. You're sitting on all this money while we're struggling. Struggling. In a 5-bedroom house with luxury vacations and new electronics. I have helped you for years, I said quietly. And we appreciate that, but family helps family. No. Family loves family. Dependency is something else entirely. I stood slowly from the table. My knees hurt from sitting too long. Or maybe from carrying this family for too many years. Ethan stood too now, frustration boiling over completely. This is unbelievable, he snapped. You'd rather hoard money than help your own son. Vanessa, murmured Ethan, but he was already too angry to stop. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The sentence that split my life cleanly into before and after. You're old and worthless if you're not helping this family anymore. Silence crashed over the room. Jacob froze. Mia looked horrified. Vanessa stared down at her wine glass without saying a word. And me? I felt strangely calm. Not because it didn't hurt. God, it hurt. It felt like someone reached inside my chest and crushed something living there. But deep down, part of me had been waiting to hear the truth for years. Not the truth about me, the truth about him. I picked up my purse carefully, smoothed invisible wrinkles from my sweater. Then I looked directly at my son, a man I barely recognized anymore. And I spoke so softly, he actually had to lean forward to hear me. Then I suppose I said you won't need anything from me anymore. Then I walked out the front door without looking back. I don't remember the drive home. To this day, I couldn't tell you what songs played on the radio, or whether the traffic lights were red or green. I just remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. You're old and worthless. The sentence replayed over and over in my mind, like a bruise being pressed repeatedly. Not because I believed it, but because some part of Ethan did. That was the part I couldn't survive pretending not to see anymore. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with silence. Deep, heavy silence. The kind that presses against your chest when nobody is waiting inside. For years, that silence terrified me. That night, it felt honest. I walked through the kitchen, still carrying my purse. The clock above the stove ticked loudly. Marcus's old coffee mug still sat drying beside the sink because I couldn't bring myself to pack it away permanently. I stood there in the dim kitchen light and suddenly burst into tears. Not graceful tears. Not movie tears. The kind that shake your entire body. I cried for Marcus. I cried for the son I used to know. I cried for the woman I had become trying to keep everybody else comfortable. Eventually, sometime after midnight, the tears stopped. Exhaustion replaced them. And in the quiet afterward, something changed. People think breaking points feel explosive. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they feel calm. I walked into Marcus's study and opened the letter again. My hands trembled less this time. Don't spend your final years saving people who refuse to save themselves. I read that sentence at least 10 times. Then I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and did something I should have done years ago. I filled out the preliminary paperwork for early retirement. My heart pounded the entire time. Not from fear, exactly. From guilt. Mothers like me are trained to feel guilty anytime we choose ourselves, even privately. even silently, especially silently. When I finally hit submit, I just stared at the screen. 35 years at Riverside Community Hospital. A lifetime of early mornings emergency budget meetings, skipped lunches, overtime, and careful planning. And suddenly, just like that, an ending had begun. The next morning, I woke up after barely 3 hours of sleep to 14 missed calls. All from Ethan. There was one voicemail. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Call me back." Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you okay?" Just irritation, as though I'd inconvenienced him by being hurt. I deleted the voicemail without replaying it. Then I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching pale morning light creep across the hardwood floors Marcus installed himself 20 years ago. For once, I didn't rush to answer anyone. At 9 o'clock, I called Daniel Kim. "Mrs. Harrison?" He answered warmly. "How are you doing?" I surprised myself with the honesty of my response. "I think my life just changed." He paused gently. What happened? I told him everything. The dinner, the house conversation, the insult, the years of financial dependency. Daniel stayed quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said carefully, "I think it's time we protect you financially before this escalates further." Protect you. Nobody had used those words about me in years. Usually, I was the protector, the helper, the solution, never the person needing protection. Daniel scheduled an emergency appointment that afternoon. By noon, Ethan had called another 6 times. Vanessa finally texted, "Can we please talk like adults?" I stared at the message for almost a full minute before responding. Adults pay their own bills. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. No response came after that. Good. I wasn't ready to hear excuses yet. At Daniel's office, later that afternoon, we spent nearly 3 hours reviewing every financial connection tied to Ethan. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Automatic monthly transfers, shared emergency access, old authorizations I'd forgotten existed. And worst of all, the renovation loan. Daniel slid paperwork across the desk toward me. "You understand," he said carefully, "that if your son stops paying this loan, the bank can legally pursue you for the remaining balance." I swallowed hard. How quickly, immediately. A cold chill moved through me. Because for the first time, I truly understood the danger. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was financial exposure. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "What are my options?" Daniel leaned back thoughtfully. "We can start restructuring your accounts immediately, remove unnecessary access, protect retirement distributions, limit liability exposure, and the loan. That's more complicated. Complicated. Another polite word for disaster." Daniel explained that Ethan would either need to refinance independently or continue making payments consistently. And if he can't, Daniel's silence answered before his words did. I suddenly realized something horrifying. Ethan wasn't just emotionally dependent on me. He might actually be financially incapable of surviving without me. The guilt hit instantly. But beneath the guilt, there was anger now too. Because my son had built his adult life on the assumption that I would sacrifice mine indefinitely. That realization hardened something inside me. Not my love, my boundaries. By evening, Daniel had already helped me begin moving assets into more protected retirement structures. We froze several unnecessary authorizations and changed access permissions tied to my accounts. Every signature felt strangely symbolic, like slowly reclaiming pieces of myself. When I got home around 6:30, Ethan's SUV was already sitting in my driveway. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. I considered driving away. Instead, I parked calmly beside him, Ethan jumped out before I even reached the porch. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" No apology, straight to anger. I unlocked my front door carefully. "I'm tired, Ethan. You ignored my calls all day." "Yes." His face flushed immediately. "You can't just cut people off because you got emotional." Emotional. Funny word coming from the man who screamed at his mother across a dinner table. I stepped inside, but Ethan followed closely behind me. "You embarrassed us last night." I turned slowly. "I embarrassed you? You stormed out like a child." I stared at him in disbelief. This man truly couldn't see beyond himself anymore. "I left because my son called me worthless." Ethan groaned loudly and dragged both hands through his hair. "Oh my God, Mom." I said it in frustration. Frustration. As though pain caused by stress somehow counted less. "You didn't mean it?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, just for 1 second, but I saw it. That hesitation told me everything. "I just meant—" He muttered, "You know how much pressure we're under." There it was again. The pressure, the bills, the endless expectation that his struggles justified my exhaustion. I looked at my son standing in my living room and suddenly saw him clearly. Not evil, not cruel deep down, just profoundly entitled. A man who had learned that guilt was easier than responsibility. "I retired today," I said suddenly. Ethan blinked. "What?" "I filed for early retirement." The color drained from his face so fast it almost frightened me. "What do you mean, retired?" "I mean, I'm done working." His eyes widened, not with happiness for me, with panic, raw panic. "But, Mom," I watched him mentally calculating bills behind his eyes. Mortgage, childcare, debt, the renovation loan, everything. That was the moment I understood the truth completely. My son wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing access to me, and somehow that hurt even worse. Ethan sat down heavily on my couch, like his legs had suddenly stopped working. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily while evening shadows stretched across the living room. Marcus used to joke that the clock sounded louder whenever someone was lying. Right then, it sounded deafening. "You retired?" Ethan repeated finally, his voice thinner now. "Without talking to me first?" The words hit me strangely, not because they were cruel, because they revealed exactly how deeply he believed my life decisions required his approval. I stared at my son for a long moment before answering. "I'm 62 years old, Ethan. That's not the point." "No," I said quietly. "Actually, I think it is." He leaned forward quickly, panic starting to overpower his anger. "How are we supposed to manage now?" There it was again. Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Are you okay after what I said?" Only, "What happens to us?" I folded my hands together carefully to stop them trembling. "You're adults," I said softly. "You'll figure it out." Ethan let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. "You can't just abandon your family." Abandon. That word almost made me laugh myself. 35 years of motherhood, 8 years of widowhood spent pouring everything I had into his household. And somehow, setting a boundary counted as abandonment. I stood slowly and walked toward the dining room buffet, where I kept old paperwork files. My heartbeat thudded hard in my chest, but my movements stayed calm. Ethan watched me suspiciously. "What are you doing?" I pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it carefully on the coffee table in front of him. "What's this? Open it." He flipped the folder open casually at first. Then his expression changed. Page after page. Bank transfers, checks, invoices, school tuition receipts, medical copays, utility bills, car repairs, sports fees, vacation loans, mortgage assistance. 5 full years documented carefully in my handwriting and financial records. Every dollar I'd spent helping him. I watched the color slowly drain from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. "A record," I answered calmly. He kept turning pages faster now, eyes darting across numbers. By the last page, his hands were shaking slightly. At the bottom sat the total amount, $96,412. The room fell silent. I hadn't originally created the file to confront Ethan. Truthfully, I started organizing it after meeting with Daniel Kim because I needed to understand my own finances clearly again. But seeing the full number had shocked even me. $96,000, nearly $100,000. And that didn't include unpaid childcare hours, groceries, gas, or emotional labor. No spreadsheet could calculate. Ethan rubbed a hand across his mouth slowly. "You kept track of this?" "Yes." "Why?" The question stunned me. Why? Because someone had to acknowledge what I'd given before it disappeared into silence completely. "You said I wasn't helping this family?" I replied quietly. I wanted to remind both of us that I have been helping for years. His jaw tightened immediately. "That's not fair." I blinked slowly. "Fair. You're acting like I used you." The audacity of that sentence actually took my breath away for a moment. "Used me," I repeated softly. "Yes." He stood abruptly, pacing now. "You offered to help, nobody forced you." There it was. The defense every selfish person eventually reaches. I never asked. You wanted to help. As though love freely given means gratitude no longer matters. "I did want to help," I admitted quietly. "Because I loved you." Ethan threw his hands up. "You still do?" "Yes," I said. "But love shouldn't require me to disappear." That stopped him. Just for a second. Something flickered across his face then. Not understanding exactly. Discomfort. Because somewhere deep down, Ethan knew I was telling the truth. But entitlement is a hard addiction to break. He looked away first. "You're overreacting over one comment." "One comment." I stared at my son in disbelief. "You think this is about one comment?" He sighed dramatically again, exhausted by my pain instead of ashamed by causing it. "I was stressed, Mom. And I was hurt. You know I didn't mean worthless, literally." The fact that he needed to clarify that made something inside me ache even deeper. I walked toward the kitchen window and looked out at the darkening yard. Marcus planted that maple tree when Ethan turned 10 years old. It towered over the lawn now. Funny how some things grow beautifully while others grow twisted. "When your father died," I said softly. Without turning around, I thought keeping this family together was my responsibility. Ethan stayed silent. "So I gave and gave and gave because I thought that's what mothers do." I finally turned back toward him. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing my help as love." His expression hardened again immediately. "That's not true." "Then what was it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, because there was no good answer. The silence stretched painfully between us. Finally, Ethan spoke again, quieter this time. "We needed you." That sentence almost broke me, because for years I thought being needed meant being valued. Now I understood they weren't always the same thing. "You needed what I provided," I said gently. "That's different." Ethan suddenly looked tired. Not boyish tired. Middle-aged tired. Bills, debt, pressure, pride. For one brief moment I saw the overwhelmed man beneath the entitlement. And that made this harder, not easier. Because monsters are simple. Broken people are complicated. "I'm trying, Mom," he muttered finally. I believed he believed that. but trying while standing on someone else's back still causes damage. You threatened to cut me off from Mia and Jacob, I reminded him quietly. His eyes flashed defensively again. I didn't mean that either. But you said it. I was angry, and I was your mother. That landed harder than anything else had. Ethan sat down slowly again, rubbing both hands over his face now. The anger was fading. Fear remained. What happens now? He asked finally. Such a small question. Such enormous meaning behind it. What happens now? Would I still babysit? Still pay bills? Still rescue them every time life became uncomfortable? I walked back toward the couch and sat across from him. For now, I said carefully, I'm stepping back financially. His head snapped up instantly. What does that mean exactly? No more emergency money. His expression tightened. No more automatic bill payments? Mom, no more covering expenses you can handle yourselves. You can't just suddenly... Yes, I interrupted softly. I can. His breathing quickened. What about the kids? There it was again. The children. Always the children. Used like emotional hostages every time accountability approached. I leaned forward slightly. Do not use Mia and Jacob to manipulate me. His face darkened instantly. I'm not manipulating you. You threatened my relationship with them yesterday. You're twisting things. No, I said quietly. I'm finally hearing them clearly. The room went silent again. Then Ethan said something that chilled me more than yelling ever could. If you stop helping, things are going to get really hard for us. Not, we'll adjust. Not, we'll figure it out. Just things will get hard. And for the first time, I let myself wonder whether maybe they should. Because perhaps hardship was the only teacher left my son might still listen to. The first person to call me selfish was my sister. That hurt more than I expected. Patricia Cole and I had always been close growing up. She was 2 years younger than me, louder than me, bolder than me. The kind of woman who could return cold soup at a restaurant without apologizing first. After Marcus died, Patricia checked on me constantly. She lived outside Cincinnati, but we spoke at least twice a week. So when her name flashed across my phone 3 days after my confrontation with Ethan, I answered immediately. Hey, Patty. Her sigh came before her words. Londyn. What's going on with you and Ethan? Of course. Vanessa had already started talking. I leaned back against my kitchen counter slowly. Depends who told the story. Vanessa said you suddenly cut them off financially. Suddenly. Interesting word. As though 8 years of exhaustion happened overnight. I closed my eyes briefly. Did Vanessa also mention Ethan calling me old and worthless silence? Then Patricia exhaled heavily. She said things got heated. Heated. Another polite little word people use when they don't want to admit someone behaved cruelly. Patty, I said quietly. My son looked me in the face and told me I was worthless if I stopped helping them. I know, and that was wrong, she admitted quickly. But families say ugly things sometimes. I stared out the kitchen window at Marcus's old bird feeder swaying in the wind. No, I whispered. Families think ugly things sometimes. That's worse. Patricia grew quiet after that. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asked women like me. But do you really want to blow up your relationship with your son over money? People always reduce it to money because acknowledging emotional exploitation makes them uncomfortable. It's not about money, I replied tiredly. Then what's it about? I swallowed hard before answering. It's about realizing the only version of me they value is the one giving them something. Patricia didn't respond immediately, but I could feel her hesitation through the silence. Because even people who love you often become uncomfortable when you stop overfunctioning. especially if your sacrifices made family gatherings easier for everyone else. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room fighting tears again. Not because Patricia entirely disagreed with me, because part of me still feared she might be right. What if I was overreacting? What if grief and exhaustion had made me bitter? What if I really was abandoning my family? That night, I almost called Ethan. Twice. Both times I stopped myself. Then something happened that changed everything. It was nearly 11 when my iPad lit up with a FaceTime request from Mia. I answered instantly. "Mia, honey, is everything okay?" My granddaughter's face appeared on the screen in dim lighting. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "can you talk for a minute?" Fear tightened instantly in my chest. "Of course." Mia glanced nervously over her shoulder before speaking again. "Mom and Dad are fighting." I sat upright immediately. "What happened?" Her voice dropped lower. "They keep talking about money." My stomach twisted painfully. Then Mia said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. "I heard Mom say they should scare you with us." The room around me seemed to go completely still. What Mia swallowed hard. She said, "If you think we're hurting, you'll help again." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Not because I was shocked anymore, because hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way suspicion never could. My sweet granddaughter looked terrified. "Grandma," she whispered shakily, "are you mad at us?" That question shattered me. "Oh, baby, no," I said immediately, tears filling my eyes. "Never at you, never." Mia's lip trembled. "Dad says everything's falling apart because you stopped helping." There it was, the burden, placed carefully onto a 13-year-old child. I closed my eyes briefly, fighting anger so intense it scared me. Not at Mia, at Ethan, at Vanessa, at two grown adults willing to let children carry emotional weight that should never belong to them. "Mia," I said gently, "listen to me carefully." She nodded silently. "This is not your fault, and grown-up money problems are never children's responsibility. But Dad's really stressed. I know he is. And Mom keeps crying." My chest ached hearing that. Because despite everything, I never wanted my grandchildren living inside chaos. But protecting them no longer meant sacrificing myself blindly. That was the lesson I was finally learning. "Mia," I asked softly, "did your parents know you called me?" She shook her head quickly. "Please don't tell them." "I won't." She looked relieved for a moment. Then quietly, she asked the question that truly broke my heart. "Are we still gonna see you?" I covered my mouth with my hand. Because underneath all the adult manipulation and financial drama sat two frightened children, terrified their family was splitting apart. "You will always see me," I promised softly. "Nothing could stop me loving you." After we hung up, I sat motionless for almost 20 minutes. Then I did something Ethan and Vanessa never expected me to do. I called a lawyer. Rebecca Moore's office occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown Columbus building overlooking the Scioto River. She specialized in family law and elder financial protection. The phrase alone made me feel ancient. Elder financial protection. Still, by the time I sat across from Rebecca 2 days later, my hands no longer shook from guilt. Only clarity. I explained everything carefully. The financial support, the dependency, the co-signed loan, the pressure, the threats involving my grandchildren. Rebecca listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back thoughtfully. "You've spent years functioning as both emotional and financial infrastructure for your son's household," she said calmly. Infrastructure. Such a cold word for motherhood. What should I do? I asked quietly. Rebecca folded her hands together. First, document everything. She advised me to save texts, emails, voicemails, financial records, and notes about conversations involving manipulation or threats. Then she said something else that startled me. You also need to start protecting your future housing situation. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? Rebecca looked directly at me. You need to decide whether that house still represents safety for you or guilt. That sentence followed me all the way home. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. That house held beautiful memories. But it also held years of exhaustion, loneliness, obligation, and expectations wrapped so tightly around me I could barely breathe anymore. That weekend, I contacted a realtor. Even saying the words aloud felt surreal. I'd like to discuss listing my home. The realtor, a kind woman named Denise Walker, visited Monday morning. She walked through every room complimenting the hardwood floors and updated kitchen, while I silently remembered Marcus laughing in the backyard or Ethan racing toy cars down the hallway as a little boy. Memories clung to every wall. But grief had kept me frozen there too long. When Denise estimated the home's market value, I nearly stopped breathing. The house was worth far more than I imagined. Enough to fully secure my retirement. Enough to start over peacefully. Enough to finally stop living in fear. And for the first time in years, freedom stopped feeling selfish. It started feeling necessary. Ethan found out I was selling the house 3 days before the sign officially went into the yard. I should have known Denise's husband golfed with somebody who knew somebody connected to Ethan's office. News travels fast when family money is involved. My phone exploded at 7:30 that morning. Ethan, Vanessa. Ethan again. Then finally a text. Why are strangers taking pictures of your house? I stared at the message while sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee. For once, my pulse didn't spike with panic. Instead, I felt strangely calm, because the decision had already been made. By 10 o'clock, Ethan's SUV flew into my driveway hard enough to scatter gravel across the pavement. I barely had time to stand before the front door burst open. "You're selling the house!" Ethan shouted before the door fully closed behind him. Vanessa followed close behind, looking pale and tense. Mia and Jacob trailed silently after them, both clearly dragged into this unwillingly. I immediately hated that the children were there. Again. Always there when emotional pressure was needed. "Yes," I answered calmly. Ethan stared at me like I'd announced I was dying. "You can't be serious. I'm very serious." Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "Londyn, maybe we should all sit down and talk rationally." Rationally. Interesting choice of word from people who arrived unannounced, ready to explode in my living room. Still, I nodded toward the couch. Jacob sat beside Mia, looking nervous. The poor boy kept bouncing his leg anxiously, while Ethan paced near the fireplace, like a man losing oxygen. Finally, he turned toward me. "So that's it," he demanded. "You're just cashing out and leaving. As though I were abandoning a battlefield I'd been forced to fight on alone for years. "I'm retiring," I said quietly, "and simplifying my life." Vanessa folded her arms tightly. By selling the family home? There it was again. The family home. Not my home. Not Marcus's home. A shared asset in their minds. I looked directly at her. "It belongs to me." The room went silent for a second. Then Ethan laughed sharply. "Wow." I blinked slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't recognize you anymore." That almost hurt. Almost. But something inside me had changed recently. I was finally starting to understand that people often accuse you of changing when you stop letting them use you. I think I said carefully, "You just don't recognize boundaries." His jaw tightened immediately. "Boundaries," he repeated incredulously. "We're family." "Yes," I replied softly. "And family should never have made me feel worthless." Mia lowered her eyes instantly. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, but Ethan bulldozed right past the discomfort. "What happens to the money he asked?" There it was. Finally. No pretending anymore. No fake concern about loneliness or safety. Straight to the money. I folded my hands together calmly to hide my disgust. "The money from the house will go into my retirement accounts." Ethan stared at me. "All of it, most of it." His face darkened. "And the rest?" I took a slow breath before answering. "I'm creating educational trust funds for Mia and Jacob." Vanessa blinked quickly. "What, the money will help with college someday?" For one brief second, genuine relief flashed across Vanessa's face. Then I finished speaking. "But the trusts will be professionally managed." The relief vanished instantly. "You won't have direct access to the funds." Silence. Heavy silence. Ethan looked like I'd slapped him. "You don't trust us?" he asked flatly. I held his gaze. "A bank has never called me worthless." That sentence landed like broken glass in the room. Mia burst into tears immediately. "Oh my God," she whispered. Jacob looked terrified. Vanessa shot Ethan an angry glare. "See?" she hissed quietly. "This is exactly what I told you." Ethan ignored her completely. Instead, he turned toward me with something colder in his expression now. "You're punishing us." "No," I said softly. "I'm protecting myself." "From your own family?" "Yes." The honesty shocked even me, but once spoken aloud, it felt undeniable. Vanessa sat down slowly on the edge of the armchair. "Londyn," she said carefully, "you know we've depended on your help." "Depended." Finally a truthful word. I know I answered. "And now you're just..." "Stopping?" I looked at her quietly. "Did either of you ever ask whether I was tired?" Neither spoke. "Did either of you ask what I wanted my retirement to look like?" More silence. "Did either of you think maybe I deserved a life outside solving your problems?" Ethan rubbed both hands over his face aggressively. "This is unbelievable." No. What was unbelievable was how long I accepted it. Mia suddenly stood up from the couch. "Dad," she whispered shakily, "did you really call Grandma worthless?" The room froze. Ethan looked stunned for a moment, like he forgot children could hear and remember things. "Mia, did you?" His silence answered before his mouth did. Mia started crying harder. Jacob looked between all of us in confusion and fear. And suddenly, I hated every second of this conversation happening in front of them. I moved gently toward Mia and wrapped my arms around her trembling shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart." "No, it's not," she sobbed softly. Her words pierced straight through me. Because she was right. None of this was okay. Not the manipulation. Not the dependency. Not the emotional warfare children were being forced to witness. Vanessa stood abruptly. We should go. But Ethan wasn't done yet. "What exactly are we supposed to do now?" he snapped. I looked at him steadily. The same thing every adult eventually has to do. "And what's that live within your means?" He stared at me in disbelief. "You think it's that simple?" "No," I replied honestly. "I think it's hard. Very hard. But difficulty doesn't justify using people." Ethan paced toward the kitchen, now breathing heavily. "You have no idea how much pressure I'm under." I almost laughed at the irony. No idea I had carried his pressure on my back for years. His mortgage pressure, his childcare pressure, his emotional pressure, his lifestyle pressure. All while quietly grieving a dead husband and exhausting myself trying to keep everyone comfortable. I know exactly how much pressure you're under, I said quietly. He stopped moving. Because I've been carrying half of it. That shut him up. Vanessa looked away first. Mia wiped tears from her cheeks silently. Jacob sat frozen on the couch, clutching one of my throw pillows. The room suddenly felt unbearably sad. Not angry. Sad. Because somewhere beneath the entitlement and manipulation sat a family slowly collapsing under years of dishonesty. And maybe the cruelest truth of all was this: I hadn't created Ethan's problems by stepping away. I had only stopped hiding them. Finally, Ethan spoke again, but his voice sounded smaller now. So what? He muttered bitterly. You're just starting over without us. I looked around the house Marcus and I built together. The family photos, the old hardwood floors, the life I sacrificed pieces of myself trying to preserve. Then I looked back at my son. No, I said softly. I'm finally starting over with myself. The first morning I woke up in my new condo, I didn't recognize the sound of silence. Not the heavy silence from my old house after Marcus died. This silence felt different, lighter somehow, peaceful. The condo sat near the western edge of Lake Erie in a quiet community outside Sandusky. Small, simple, 2 bedrooms. A balcony overlooking water that turned silver every morning when sunlight hit it just right. Marcus and I used to talk about retiring somewhere near a lake. Nothing fancy, he'd say. Just peace. Back then, peace sounded boring to me. Now it sounded priceless. I stood barefoot on the balcony, holding coffee in both hands, while cold autumn wind brushed against my face. No ringing phone, no urgent requests, no rushing to rescue someone else before I'd even finished breakfast. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me for a few quiet minutes. And honestly, that scared me almost as much as it healed me. Because when you spend years being needed, stillness feels unfamiliar at first. The move itself happened faster than I expected. Denise sold my Columbus house within 11 days. Apparently, the market loved charming family homes with original hardwood floors. I cried privately after signing the papers. Not because I regretted selling, because letting go of that house felt like burying Marcus all over again. But I knew staying there would have buried me too. So I left. I kept Marcus's recliner, his jazz records. The yellow kitchen clock he once insisted was too ugly to throw away. And somehow carrying those little pieces into a smaller place made grief feel less like drowning and more like memory. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was beginning to crack visibly. At first, he tried pretending everything was fine. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then came the phone calls. Not emotional calls, financial ones. Mom, the daycare costs are killing us. Mom, interest rates changed again. Mom, Vanessa's car needs repairs. Every conversation circled back to money like desperate vultures. And every time I calmly refused to step back into the role I'd escaped. You'll figure it out. I started saying that often. Not cruelly, truthfully. One afternoon, Gloria visited the condo carrying 2 grocery bags and a bottle of wine. Oh my God, she laughed while stepping onto the balcony. You actually look younger here. I rolled my eyes. That's impossible. No, she said seriously. Your shoulders aren't touching your ears anymore. That made me laugh harder than it should have. We sat outside drinking wine while gulls drifted over the lake. For the first time in years, I talked about things other than Ethan. Books, painting classes, travel, sleep, actual sleep. I forgot what your personality sounded like, Gloria admitted gently at one point. The comment hit me unexpectedly hard because I had forgotten too. That evening, after Gloria left, I signed up for a beginner watercolor class at the community center. The next week, I joined a walking group, mostly made up of widows in their 60s and 70s, who somehow laughed louder than women half their age. One of them, Eleanor, told me something during our second walk together. Menopause and retirement are nature's way of forcing women to finally stop performing for everybody. I laughed for 10 straight minutes, then cried in my car afterward. Because she was right. But peace never arrives cleanly when unresolved people still have access to you. About 6 weeks after I moved, Ethan sent me an email at 1:14 in the morning. Not a text. An email? Long, angry, formal. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. R.E. Financial Responsibility. I read it twice. Then a third time because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. According to Ethan, I had created financial dependency expectations through years of support and was now abandoning commitments that affected the stability of his household. My own son sounded like a bitter lawyer. Worse, buried halfway through the email sat a sentence that made my blood run cold. You previously agreed to continue helping while we stabilized financially. Agreed. The wording felt deliberate, dangerously deliberate. I immediately forwarded the email to Rebecca Moore. She called me within an hour. Londyn, she said carefully, I need you to listen closely. My pulse quickened instantly. What's wrong? That email concerns me. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Why? Because your son may be trying to establish implied financial obligation. I stared at the lake outside my window while dread spread through my chest. Can he do that? Probably not successfully, Rebecca said. But I want to review every financial document connected to him immediately. The next afternoon, I drove back to Columbus carrying a box filled with old paperwork. Rebecca's office smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. She spread documents across the conference table while I sat nervously twisting Marcus's wedding band between my fingers. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed everything: the renovation loan, bank transfers, old authorizations, credit accounts. Then Rebecca suddenly stopped moving. What is this? My stomach dropped instantly. She turned a document toward me. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary credit application. Then I saw the signature line. My name sat there in blue ink, except I hadn't signed it. Every hair on my arm stood up. I never opened this account. Rebecca's face hardened immediately. Are you sure? Yes. She slid additional pages toward me. The account had been active nearly 11 months. Charges included furniture stores, electronics, travel expenses, luxury retail purchases, thousands of dollars, all under my name. I felt physically sick. There has to be some mistake. Rebecca looked grim. Londyn, this signature resembles yours, but it's inconsistent in several places. My breathing became shallow. No, but deep down, I already knew. Rebecca met my eyes carefully. Did your son ever have access to your documents? Images flashed instantly through my mind. Ethan helping organize papers after Marcus died. Ethan stopping by the house alone sometimes. Ethan knowing my social security information. My stomach turned violently. No, I whispered. No. Ethan wouldn't. But even as I said it, certainty crumbled beneath me. Because hadn't I once believed Ethan would never call me worthless too? Rebecca spoke gently now. I'm not accusing anyone yet, but this may involve identity fraud. Fraud. The word echoed through my skull. Not irresponsibility, not entitlement. Fraud. I suddenly remembered every expensive purchase Ethan and Vanessa claimed they budgeted carefully for. Every unexplained financial emergency. every panicked reaction after I stopped helping. And slowly, something horrifying began taking shape. What if Ethan's life wasn't merely unstable? What if it had been collapsing long before I ever stepped away? My phone rang suddenly across the table. "Mia?" I answered immediately. "Grandma." Her voice sounded shaky. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are screaming at each other again." I closed my eyes. Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. I heard Mom say something about fake signatures. Rebecca's eyes locked onto mine instantly across the conference table. And in that moment, I realized this nightmare was far worse than I'd imagined. The first morning I woke up in my new condo, I didn't recognize the sound of silence. Not the heavy silence from my old house after Marcus died. This silence felt different. Lighter somehow. Peaceful. The condo sat near the western edge of Lake Erie in a quiet community outside Sandusky. Small. Simple. 2 bedrooms. A balcony overlooking water that turned silver every morning when sunlight hit it just right. Marcus and I used to talk about retiring somewhere near a lake. Nothing fancy, he'd say. Just peace. Back then, peace sounded boring to me. Now it sounded priceless. I stood barefoot on the balcony holding coffee in both hands while cold autumn wind brushed against my face. No ringing phone. No urgent requests. No rushing to rescue someone else before I'd even finished breakfast. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me for a few quiet minutes. And honestly, that scared me almost as much as it healed me. Because when you spend years being needed, stillness feels unfamiliar at first. The move itself happened faster than I expected. Denise sold my Columbus house within 11 days. Apparently, the market loved charming family homes with original hardwood floors. I cried privately after signing the papers. Not because I regretted selling. Because letting go of that house felt like burying Marcus all over again. But I knew staying there would have buried me too. So I left. I kept Marcus's recliner, his jazz records. The yellow kitchen clock he once insisted was too ugly to throw away. And somehow carrying those little pieces into a smaller place made grief feel less like drowning and more like memory. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was beginning to crack visibly. At first, he tried pretending everything was fine. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then came the phone calls. Not emotional calls, financial ones. "Mom, the daycare costs are killing us." "Mom, interest rates changed again." "Mom, Vanessa's car needs repairs." Every conversation circled back to money like desperate vultures. And every time I calmly refused to step back into the role I'd escaped. "You'll figure it out." I started saying that often. Not cruelly, truthfully. One afternoon, Gloria visited the condo carrying 2 grocery bags and a bottle of wine. "Oh my God," she laughed while stepping onto the balcony. "You actually look younger here." I rolled my eyes. "That's impossible." "No," she said seriously. "Your shoulders aren't touching your ears anymore." That made me laugh harder than it should have. We sat outside drinking wine while gulls drifted over the lake. For the first time in years, I talked about things other than Ethan. Books, painting classes, travel, sleep, actual sleep. "I forgot what your personality sounded like," Gloria admitted gently at one point. The comment hit me unexpectedly hard. Because I had forgotten too. That evening, after Gloria left, I signed up for a beginner watercolor class at the community center. The next week, I joined a walking group mostly made up of widows in their 60s and 70s, who somehow laughed louder than women half their age. One of them, Eleanor, told me something during our second walk together. Menopause and retirement are nature's way of forcing women to finally stop performing for everybody. I laughed for 10 straight minutes, then cried in my car afterward, because she was right. But peace never arrives cleanly when unresolved people still have access to you. About 6 weeks after I moved, Ethan sent me an email at 1:14 in the morning. Not a text. An email. Long, angry, formal. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. R.E. Financial responsibility. I read it twice, then a third time because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. According to Ethan, I had created financial dependency expectations through years of support and was now abandoning commitments that affected the stability of his household. My own son sounded like a bitter lawyer. Worse, buried halfway through the email sat a sentence that made my blood run cold. You previously agreed to continue helping while we stabilized financially. Agreed. The wording felt deliberate, dangerously deliberate. I immediately forwarded the email to Rebecca Moore. She called me within an hour. Londyn, she said carefully, I need you to listen closely. My pulse quickened instantly. What's wrong? That email concerns me. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Why? Because your son may be trying to establish implied financial obligation. I stared at the lake outside my window while dread spread through my chest. Can he do that? Probably not successfully, Rebecca said. But I want to review every financial document connected to him immediately. The next afternoon, I drove back to Columbus, carrying a box filled with old paperwork. Rebecca's office smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. She spread documents across the conference table while I sat nervously twisting Marcus's wedding band between my fingers. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed everything. The renovation loan, bank transfers, old authorizations, credit accounts. Then Rebecca suddenly stopped moving. What is this? My stomach dropped instantly. She turned a document toward me. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary credit application. Then I saw the signature line. My name sat there in blue ink. Except I hadn't signed it. Every hair on my arm stood up. I never opened this account. Rebecca's face hardened immediately. Are you sure? Yes. She slid additional pages toward me. The account had been active nearly 11 months. Charges included furniture stores, electronics, travel expenses, luxury retail purchases, thousands of dollars, all under my name. I felt physically sick. There has to be some mistake. Rebecca looked grim. Londyn? This signature resembles yours, but it's inconsistent in several places. My breathing became shallow. No, but deep down, I already knew. Rebecca met my eyes carefully. Did your son ever have access to your documents? Images flashed instantly through my mind. Ethan helping organize papers after Marcus died. Ethan stopping by the house alone sometimes. Ethan knowing my social security information. My stomach turned violently. No, I whispered. No. Ethan wouldn't. But even as I said it, certainty crumbled beneath me. Because hadn't I once believed Ethan would never call me worthless too? Rebecca spoke gently now. I'm not accusing anyone yet, but this may involve identity fraud. Fraud. The word echoed through my skull. Not irresponsibility, not entitlement. Fraud. I suddenly remembered every expensive purchase Ethan and Vanessa claimed they budgeted carefully for. Every unexplained financial emergency. Every panicked reaction after I stopped helping. And slowly, something horrifying began taking shape. What if Ethan's life wasn't merely unstable? What if it had been collapsing long before I ever stepped away? My phone rang suddenly across the table. Mia! I answered immediately. Grandma. Her voice sounded shaky. What's wrong, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are screaming at each other again. I closed my eyes. Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. I heard Mom say something about fake signatures. Rebecca's eyes locked onto mine instantly across the conference table. And in that moment, I realized this nightmare was far worse than I'd imagined. The first morning I woke up in my new condo, I didn't recognize the sound of silence. Not the heavy silence from my old house after Marcus died. This silence felt different. Lighter, somehow. Peaceful. The condo sat near the western edge of Lake Erie in a quiet community outside Sandusky. Small, simple, 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking water that turned silver every morning when sunlight hit it just right. Marcus and I used to talk about retiring somewhere near a lake. Nothing fancy, he'd say, just peace. Back then, peace sounded boring to me. Now it sounded priceless. I stood barefoot on the balcony holding coffee in both hands, while cold autumn wind brushed against my face. No ringing phone, no urgent requests, no rushing to rescue someone else before I'd even finished breakfast. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me for a few quiet minutes. And honestly, that scared me almost as much as it healed me. Because when you spend years being needed, stillness feels unfamiliar at first. The move itself happened faster than I expected. Denise sold my Columbus house within 11 days. Apparently, the market loved charming family homes with original hardwood floors. I cried privately after signing the papers. Not because I regretted selling. Because letting go of that house felt like burying Marcus all over again. But I knew staying there would have buried me too. So I left. I kept Marcus's recliner, his jazz records, the yellow kitchen clock he once insisted was too ugly to throw away. And somehow carrying those little pieces into a smaller place made grief feel less like drowning and more like memory. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was beginning to crack visibly. At first, he tried pretending everything was fine. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then came the phone calls. Not emotional calls, financial ones. Mom, the daycare costs are killing us. Mom, interest rates changed again. Mom, Vanessa's car needs repairs. Every conversation circled back to money like desperate vultures. And every time I calmly refused to step back into the role I'd escaped. You'll figure it out. I started saying that often, not cruelly, truthfully. One afternoon, Gloria visited the condo carrying 2 grocery bags and a bottle of wine. "Oh my God," she laughed while stepping onto the balcony. "You actually look younger here." I rolled my eyes. "That's impossible." "No," she said seriously. "Your shoulders aren't touching your ears anymore." That made me laugh harder than it should have. We sat outside drinking wine while gulls drifted over the lake. For the first time in years, I talked about things other than Ethan. Books, painting classes, travel, sleep, actual sleep. "I forgot what your personality sounded like," Gloria admitted gently at one point. The comment hit me unexpectedly hard. Because I had forgotten too. That evening, after Gloria left, I signed up for a beginner watercolor class at the community center. The next week, I joined a walking group mostly made up of widows in their 60s and 70s, who somehow laughed louder than women half their age. One of them, Eleanor, told me something during our second walk together. Menopause and retirement are nature's way of forcing women to finally stop performing for everybody. I laughed for 10 straight minutes, then cried in my car afterward. Because she was right. But peace never arrives cleanly when unresolved people still have access to you. About 6 weeks after I moved, Ethan sent me an email at 1:14 in the morning. Not a text. An email. Long, angry, formal. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. R.E. Financial Responsibility. I read it twice, then a third time, because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. According to Ethan, I had created financial dependency expectations through years of support and was now abandoning commitments that affected the stability of his household. My own son sounded like a bitter lawyer. Worse, buried halfway through the email sat a sentence that made my blood run cold. You previously agreed to continue helping while we stabilized financially. Agreed. The wording felt deliberate, dangerously deliberate. I immediately forwarded the email to Rebecca Moore. She called me within an hour. Londyn, she said carefully, I need you to listen closely. My pulse quickened instantly. What's wrong? That email concerns me. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Why? Because your son may be trying to establish implied financial obligation. I stared at the lake outside my window while dread spread through my chest. Can he do that? Probably not successfully, Rebecca said. But I want to review every financial document connected to him immediately. The next afternoon, I drove back to Columbus carrying a box filled with old paperwork. Rebecca's office smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. She spread documents across the conference table, while I sat nervously twisting Marcus's wedding band between my fingers. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed everything. The renovation loan, bank transfers, old authorizations, credit accounts. Then Rebecca suddenly stopped moving. What is this? My stomach dropped instantly. She turned a document toward me. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary credit application. Then I saw the signature line. My name sat there in blue ink, except I hadn't signed it. Every hair on my arm stood up. I never opened this account. Rebecca's face hardened immediately. Are you sure? Yes. She slid additional pages toward me. The account had been active nearly 11 months. Charges included furniture stores, electronics, travel expenses, luxury retail purchases, thousands of dollars, all under my name. I felt physically sick. There has to be some mistake. Rebecca looked grim. Londyn, this signature resembles yours, but it's inconsistent in several places. My breathing became shallow. No. But deep down, I already knew. Rebecca met my eyes carefully. Did your son ever have access to your documents? Images flashed instantly through my mind. Ethan helping organize papers after Marcus died. Ethan stopping by the house alone sometimes. Ethan knowing my social security information. My stomach turned violently. No, I whispered. No. Ethan wouldn't, but even as I said it, certainty crumbled beneath me. Because hadn't I once believed Ethan would never call me worthless too? Rebecca spoke gently now. I'm not accusing anyone yet, but this may involve identity fraud. Fraud. The word echoed through my skull. Not irresponsibility, not entitlement. Fraud. I suddenly remembered every expensive purchase Ethan and Vanessa claimed they budgeted carefully for. Every unexplained financial emergency. Every panicked reaction after I stopped helping. And slowly, something horrifying began taking shape. What if Ethan's life wasn't merely unstable? What if it had been collapsing long before I ever stepped away? My phone rang suddenly across the table. Mia, I answered immediately. Grandma. Her voice sounded shaky. What's wrong, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are screaming at each other again. I closed my eyes. Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. I heard Mom say something about fake signatures. Rebecca's eyes locked onto mine instantly across the conference table. And in that moment, I realized this nightmare was far worse than I'd imagined. The first morning I woke up in my new condo, I didn't recognize the sound of silence. Not the heavy silence from my old house after Marcus died. This silence felt different. Lighter somehow. Peaceful. The condo sat near the western edge of Lake Erie in a quiet community outside Sandusky. Small, simple. 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking water that turned silver every morning when sunlight hit it just right. Marcus and I used to talk about retiring somewhere near a lake. Nothing fancy, he'd say. Just peace. Back then, peace sounded boring to me. Now it sounded priceless. I stood barefoot on the balcony, holding coffee in both hands, while cold autumn wind brushed against my face. No ringing phone, no urgent requests, no rushing to rescue someone else before I'd even finished breakfast. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me for a few quiet minutes. And honestly, that scared me almost as much as it healed me. Because when you spend years being needed, stillness feels unfamiliar at first. The move itself happened faster than I expected. Denise sold my Columbus house within 11 days. Apparently, the market loved charming family homes with original hardwood floors. I cried privately after signing the papers. Not because I regretted selling, because letting go of that house felt like bearing Marcus all over again. But I knew staying there would have buried me too. So I left. I kept Marcus's recliner, his jazz records, the yellow kitchen clock he once insisted was too ugly to throw away. And somehow, carrying those little pieces into a smaller place made grief feel less like drowning and more like memory. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was beginning to crack visibly. At first, he tried pretending everything was fine. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then came the phone calls. Not emotional calls, financial ones. Mom, the daycare costs are killing us. Mom, interest rates changed again. Mom, Vanessa's car needs repairs. Every conversation circled back to money like desperate vultures, and every time I calmly refused to step back into the role I'd escaped. You'll figure it out. I started saying that often, not cruelly, truthfully. One afternoon, Gloria visited the condo carrying 2 grocery bags and a bottle of wine. "Oh my God!" she laughed while stepping onto the balcony. "You actually look younger here." I rolled my eyes. "That's impossible." "No," she said seriously. "Your shoulders aren't touching your ears anymore." That made me laugh harder than it should have. We sat outside drinking wine while gulls drifted over the lake. For the first time in years, I talked about things other than Ethan. Books, painting classes, travel, sleep, actual sleep. "I forgot what your personality sounded like," Gloria admitted gently at one point. The comment hit me unexpectedly hard, because I had forgotten too. That evening, after Gloria left, I signed up for a beginner watercolor class at the community center. The next week, I joined a walking group mostly made up of widows in their 60s and 70s, who somehow laughed louder than women half their age. One of them, Eleanor, told me something during our second walk together. Menopause and retirement are nature's way of forcing women to finally stop performing for everybody. I laughed for 10 straight minutes, then cried in my car afterward, because she was right. But peace never arrives cleanly when unresolved people still have access to you. About 6 weeks after I moved, Ethan sent me an email at 1:14 in the morning. Not a text, an email. Long, angry, formal. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. R.E. Financial responsibility. I read it twice, then a third time because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. According to Ethan, I had created financial dependency expectations through years of support and was now abandoning commitments that affected the stability of his household. My own son sounded like a bitter lawyer. Worse, buried halfway through the email sat a sentence that made my blood run cold. "You previously agreed to continue helping while we stabilized financially." Agreed. The wording felt deliberate, dangerously deliberate. I immediately forwarded the email to Rebecca Moore. She called me within an hour. "Londyn," she said carefully, "I need you to listen closely." My pulse quickened instantly. "What's wrong? That email concerns me." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Why? Because your son may be trying to establish implied financial obligation. I stared at the lake outside my window, while dread spread through my chest. Can he do that? Probably not successfully, Rebecca said. But I want to review every financial document connected to him immediately. The next afternoon, I drove back to Columbus carrying a box filled with old paperwork. Rebecca's office smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. She spread documents across the conference table while I sat nervously twisting Marcus's wedding band between my fingers. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed everything. The renovation loan, bank transfers, old authorizations, credit accounts. Then Rebecca suddenly stopped moving. What is this? My stomach dropped instantly. She turned a document toward me. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary credit application. Then I saw the signature line. My name sat there in blue ink. Except, I hadn't signed it. Every hair on my arms stood up. I never opened this account. Rebecca's face hardened immediately. Are you sure? Yes. She slid additional pages toward me. The account had been active nearly 11 months. Charges included furniture stores, electronics, travel expenses, luxury retail purchases, thousands of dollars. All under my name. I felt physically sick. There has to be some mistake. Rebecca looked grim. Londyn. This signature resembles yours, but it's inconsistent in several places. My breathing became shallow. No, but deep down, I already knew. Rebecca met my eyes carefully. Did your son ever have access to your documents? Images flashed instantly through my mind. Ethan helping organize papers after Marcus died. Ethan stopping by the house alone sometimes. Ethan knowing my social security information. My stomach turned violently. No, I whispered. No. Ethan wouldn't. But even as I said it, certainty crumbled beneath me. Because hadn't I once believed Ethan would never call me worthless too? Rebecca spoke gently now. I'm not accusing anyone yet, but this may involve identity fraud. Fraud. The word echoed through my skull. Not irresponsibility, not entitlement. Fraud. I suddenly remembered every expensive purchase Ethan and Vanessa claimed they budgeted carefully for. Every unexplained financial emergency, every panicked reaction after I stopped helping. And slowly, something horrifying began taking shape. What if Ethan's life wasn't merely unstable? What if it had been collapsing long before I ever stepped away? My phone rang suddenly across the table. Mia, I answered immediately. Grandma? Her voice sounded shaky. What's wrong, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are screaming at each other again. I closed my eyes. Then came the sentence that made my blood run cold. I heard Mom say something about fake signatures. Rebecca's eyes locked onto mine instantly across the conference table. And in that moment, I realized this nightmare was far worse than I'd imagined. I barely remember driving from Rebecca's office to Ethan's house. My hands shook the entire way. Not from anger, from grief. There's something uniquely devastating about realizing your child may have betrayed you in ways your heart still refuses to fully accept. Even after everything Ethan had said to me. Even after the manipulation, the guilt, the entitlement, some stubborn part of me still believed there had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding, a mistake. Because mothers spend years building emotional homes inside their children. And when those homes collapse, part of you gets buried in the rubble too. The entire drive back to Columbus, Mia's frightened voice echoed in my mind. Mom said something about fake signatures. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Rain streaked across the windshield while traffic crawled slowly through downtown. By the time I reached Ethan's neighborhood, night had already fallen. I immediately knew something was wrong. Their porch light was off. Vanessa's SUV sat crooked in the driveway. And through the front window, I could see shadows moving sharply back and forth, yelling. I parked quickly and hurried toward the house. Before I could knock, the front door flew open. Vanessa stood there holding a suitcase. Her mascara had smeared beneath both eyes. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then she whispered, "Thank God." Not hello, not welcome, thank God. Behind her, Ethan's voice exploded from somewhere inside the house. "You called her?" Vanessa flinched visibly. That alone told me how bad things had become. I stepped inside immediately. The living room looked like emotional fallout. A lamp knocked sideways. Papers scattered across the coffee table. Jacob curled tightly into the corner of the couch, clutching a blanket while Mia stood protectively beside him. The sight of those children broke something inside me instantly. Grandma Jacob cried, rushing toward me. I dropped to my knees and wrapped both arms around him. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. Not even close. Ethan stormed into the room seconds later. His face looked awful. Bloodshot eyes, wrinkled clothes, 3-day beard. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked cornered. "Why are you here?" he snapped. I stood slowly, keeping one hand on Jacob's shoulder. Mia called me. His jaw tightened instantly. "Of course she did." Vanessa suddenly rounded on him. "Don't you dare blame the kids for this." The hatred in her voice startled me. Not irritation. Hatred. Years of buried resentment spilling loose all at once. Ethan pointed angrily toward me. "This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it?" he shouted. "Turn everybody against me." I stared at my son in disbelief. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I came because your children are terrified." He laughed bitterly. "Well, maybe they should be." Jacob started crying harder immediately. "Stop!" I snapped sharply. The entire room froze. Even Ethan, because I almost never raised my voice. But I was done watching adults weaponize chaos around children. "Go upstairs for a minute, sweetheart," I told Jacob gently. Mia took his hand silently and led him toward the stairs. Before disappearing, she looked back at me with Marcus's same quiet sadness in her eyes. That nearly destroyed me. The second the children were gone, Vanessa exploded. "Tell her," she screamed at Ethan. "Vanessa, no!" she shouted. "I am done protecting you." My stomach dropped. Ethan's face drained instantly. "What is she talking about?" I asked quietly. Neither answered. Then Vanessa laughed bitterly through tears. "You know what the funniest part is?" she said to me. "I actually believed him for a while." Vanessa, Ethan warned. But she kept going. "He told me you knew about the accounts." My blood turned cold. "What accounts?" Vanessa stared at Ethan with open disgust now. "The credit cards, the loans, the refinancing attempts." I looked slowly toward my son. And suddenly, I already knew. Before anyone said it aloud. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. "Ethan!" I whispered, "What did you do?" He looked away. That hurt more than if he'd screamed. Because guilty people avoid your eyes when the truth finally catches them. Vanessa wiped tears angrily from her face. "He forged your signature." The room went completely silent. I heard the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the clock ticking near the hallway. My own heartbeat pounding painfully inside my ears. But somehow, not shock. Because deep down, I think I'd already begun grieving the truth before hearing it spoken aloud. "How many times?" I asked quietly. Ethan still wouldn't look at me. "Answer her," Vanessa screamed. Finally he spoke. Three. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. 3 times my son signed my name illegally. 3 times he looked at his mother as an opportunity instead of a person. What accounts? I asked again, voice barely steady now. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face. It started small. That's how every disaster begins. Small. There was pressure at work, he muttered. Bonuses got cut. Then interest rates jumped. Then debt piled up. Vanessa laughed harshly through tears. So you stole from your mother. I was going to fix it when she shouted. After we lost the house. The word hit hard. I turned slowly toward Ethan. Are you in that much trouble, Silence? That was answer enough. Vanessa collapsed heavily into the armchair, exhausted. He's drowning, she whispered. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked too. Not glamorous Vanessa, not controlling Vanessa, just a woman realizing the life she believed was stable had been built on lies. He kept refinancing things, she said shakily, moving balances around, opening accounts, borrowing from everywhere. I felt sick. Why? I whispered. Ethan finally looked at me then, and what I saw in his face wasn't evil. It was shame. Raw, ugly, consuming shame. I didn't want to fail, he admitted quietly. The honesty hit harder than yelling ever could. He sat down heavily and stared at the floor. I kept thinking one more promotion would fix everything. One more bonus. One more year. And instead, I asked softly. His voice cracked slightly. Instead, I kept digging deeper. Vanessa covered her mouth and started crying again. I should have felt furious. Part of me did. But another part only felt heartbreak. Because suddenly, I could see the terrified little boy Ethan used to be beneath the wreckage of the man sitting in front of me. The boy who cried after getting a bad grade. The boy who once asked Marcus at age 11. What if I grow up and disappoint everybody, God? Maybe he'd spent his whole life afraid of failure, and somewhere along the way, fear turned into dishonesty, then entitlement, then desperation. Still, none of that erased what he'd done. I sat down slowly across from him. You used my name, I said quietly. Tears finally filled his eyes. I know. You risked my retirement. I know. You looked at your mother and decided I was easier to sacrifice than your pride. That one broke him. Ethan lowered his head into his hands completely. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then quietly, almost like a child again, he whispered, I was ashamed. The room felt unbearably heavy. I stared at my son for a very long time before answering. Shame, I said softly, does not give you permission to destroy people who love you. That night felt like standing inside the ruins of something that had been collapsing quietly for years. Nobody screamed anymore after Ethan admitted the truth. Somehow silence felt worse. Vanessa sat curled into the armchair, hugging herself tightly, while Ethan remained hunched forward on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like a man waiting for a verdict. And me, I felt strangely numb. Not calm, not forgiving, just emotionally exhausted in a way words barely describe. The kind of exhaustion that settles deep into your bones after carrying too much pain for too long. Upstairs, I could hear faint footsteps moving around Mia's bedroom. The children were still awake, still listening, still absorbing damage adults would spend years pretending didn't affect them. I stood slowly. Where are you going? Ethan asked quietly. To check on the kids. His face crumpled slightly at that, not because he suddenly became innocent, because guilt had finally started catching up to him. I walked upstairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Mia opened the bedroom door before I could knock. She looked older somehow. Children do that when family illusions shatter. Can Jacob sleep with me tonight? She whispered. Of course. Inside the room, Jacob lay curled beneath blankets clutching a stuffed dinosaur Marcus had bought him years ago. The sight nearly broke me. I sat beside him gently. "Hey, buddy." His eyes looked watery. "Are Mom and Dad getting divorced straight to the fear children always carry first?" I stroked his hair carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Is Dad going to jail?" The question hit like ice water. I glanced toward Mia instantly. She looked away guiltily. Clearly she'd overheard more downstairs than I realized. I took a slow breath. "Nobody knows what's happening yet," I said gently. "Right now, the important thing is that you two are safe and loved." Jacob's lip trembled. "Did Dad do something bad, God? How do you answer questions like that without destroying a child's relationship with their parent?" I chose honesty, wrapped carefully in compassion. "Your dad made some very bad decisions," I said softly. "But people can make mistakes and still love their children." Mia sat quietly at the edge of her desk chair before finally speaking. "He's been lying for a long time." The sadness in her voice hurt worse than anger would have. "Children know more than adults think. Always." I looked at her gently. "What have you heard?" She hesitated. Then words started pouring out like secrets she'd been carrying too long. "The money fight started months ago," she whispered. "Mom kept asking Dad why bills were weird, and Dad kept saying everything was under control." I closed my eyes briefly. Mia continued softly. "Then one night, I heard Mom crying in the kitchen because credit cards got declined. Downstairs, I heard a muffled crash, followed by Vanessa's sharp voice. Probably another argument beginning. Mia flinched immediately at the sound. That alone told me how often this chaos had already happened before tonight. I made a decision right then. "Get your overnight bags," I said gently. Both children blinked. "What, you're coming with me tonight?" Relief flooded Mia's face so quickly it nearly made me cry. Jacob sat upright immediately. "Really?" "Yes, sweetheart." Within 15 minutes, I had both children loaded into my car, with backpacks, pajamas, and Jacob's dinosaur tucked safely under his arm. Ethan followed us outside just as I opened the driver's side door. "You're taking them?" he asked hoarsely. "For the night." Vanessa stood silently behind him on the porch. Neither argued. That frightened me more than yelling would have, because it meant both of them knew the children shouldn't stay inside that house tonight. Ethan looked broken, standing beneath the porch light. Not manipulative, not arrogant, just broken. "I never wanted this," he whispered. I looked at my son carefully. "Then you should have stopped long before it reached this point." He lowered his eyes immediately. I drove the children to my condo near Lake Erie just after midnight. Jacob fell asleep halfway there. Mia stayed awake quietly staring out the window while highway lights flickered across her face. Finally, she asked softly, "Grandma." "Yes, are you mad at Dad forever? Children thinkin' forever?" I thought carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly, "but sometimes love has to change shape after trust gets broken." She absorbed that quietly. Then she whispered something that shattered me completely. "I think Dad hates himself." I gripped the steering wheel harder, because deep down, I thought she might be right. The next morning, I made pancakes while Jacob watched cartoons, and Mia sat at the kitchen counter wrapped in one of my oversized sweaters. For a few brief hours, things almost felt normal, safe. Then my phone rang. "Rebecca Moore." I answered immediately. "Londyn, we need to talk." Her tone made my stomach tighten. "What happened?" I reviewed additional records this morning. I walked quietly onto the balcony so the children wouldn't hear, and Rebecca paused carefully. The fraudulent activity may be larger than we initially thought. Cold fear spread through me instantly. How much larger? There are indications your information may have been used during at least one refinancing inquiry connected to Ethan's home. I closed my eyes slowly. Oh my God. We still need confirmation, Rebecca cautioned. But if true, this escalates significantly. I leaned heavily against the balcony railing, overlooking the gray lake water. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Not because of the money. Because every new discovery peeled away another layer of trust I once had in my son. Rebecca's voice softened. Londyn, I need to ask something difficult. I swallowed hard. Okay, if financial investigators become involved, are you willing to formally report the fraud? There it was, the question I'd been avoiding since this nightmare began. Motherhood versus self-protection. Love versus accountability. I stared out across the water while tears filled my eyes. I don't know, I whispered truthfully, because reporting Ethan could destroy his career. Possibly worse. But staying silent might destroy my future entirely. Rebecca spoke gently. You don't have to decide today. After we hung up, I stood outside alone for a long time, listening to waves crash softly against the shoreline below. Inside, I could hear Jacob laughing at cartoons, Mia humming quietly while helping clean breakfast dishes. Life continuing somehow despite everything. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Vanessa. I'm taking the kids to my mother's for a while. Another message followed seconds later. You deserved better than what Ethan did. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then finally, another message arrived. I didn't know how bad it was until recently, but I knew enough, and I stayed anyway. That one hit differently, because suddenly I realized something painful. This family hadn't collapsed because one person lied. It collapsed because everyone ignored the truth for too long, including me. And perhaps that was the hardest lesson of all. Love cannot survive where honesty does not live. The strange thing about rock bottom is that sometimes it finally forces honesty into the room. For weeks after Vanessa left with the children, Ethan barely contacted me. No angry calls, no guilt-filled messages, no financial emergencies. Just silence. And honestly, the silence scared me. Because for the first time in his life, my son had nobody left cushioning the consequences of his decisions. Vanessa moved in temporarily with her mother near Dayton. Mia and Jacob stayed enrolled in their schools, but the children spent weekends with me at the condo whenever possible. Those weekends became the brightest parts of my life. Mia helped me cook. Jacob insisted on teaching me card games I still barely understood. Some nights, we sat on the balcony wrapped in blankets watching the lake, while gulls drifted across the dark water. And slowly, for the first time in years, I stopped feeling like a servant in my own family. I started feeling like a grandmother again. One Saturday morning, Mia looked up from her cereal and asked quietly, "Do you think Dad's okay?" There it was again. Children loving imperfect parents, even after disappointment. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly before answering. I think your dad is very lost right now. Mia nodded silently. Then she whispered something so mature it nearly broke me. I think he thought money made him important. I stared at her. Because somehow, at 13 years old, she had already understood what Ethan still couldn't fully face. The following Tuesday, Ethan finally called. His voice sounded rough. Can we meet? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me still felt exhausted all the way down to my soul. But another part remembered Marcus once telling me something important about accountability. Real consequences only matter if people survive them long enough to learn. So I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between Columbus and Sandusky. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who refill coffee without asking. Ethan looked older. Much older. The expensive watch was gone. The polished confidence, too. He sat across from me, twisting a paper napkin repeatedly between his fingers. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "I sold the SUV." I blinked once. "Okay, and I'm probably selling the house." The words sounded painful coming out of him, because that house had never just been a house to Ethan. It was proof. Proof he was successful. Proof he was winning at adulthood. Proof he mattered. And now, the illusion was collapsing. "I started meeting with a financial counselor," he added quietly. I nodded slowly, but said nothing. Not because I didn't care. Because I'd spent too many years rescuing him from discomfort too quickly. Silence can teach people things, explanations never will. Ethan stared down into his coffee. "I hate you sometimes," he admitted suddenly. The honesty startled me less than it should have. "Why? Because you stopped making things easier." I absorbed that quietly. Then Ethan looked up, eyes exhausted. "But mostly," he whispered, "I hate myself." There it was, the truth beneath everything else. Not greed alone, not cruelty alone. Shame, a lifetime of shame wrapped in ego and performance. I leaned back slowly against the booth. "When did you become so afraid of failing?" I asked softly. He laughed bitterly without humor. "You really don't know." "No." Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. "Dad always made everything look easy." That sentence caught me off guard. What he knew how to fix things, handle money, build stuff, take care of people. Ethan shook his head slowly, and I just kept feeling smaller. My chest tightened unexpectedly, because Marcus had loved Ethan deeply. But maybe Ethan spent years quietly comparing himself to a father who seemed larger than life. I thought if I looked successful enough, Ethan continued softly, eventually, I'd feel successful. "And did you?" He gave a broken little laugh. "No." We sat in silence for a while after that. The waitress brought fresh coffee. Outside, rain streaked softly against the diner windows. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "When Dad died, I promised myself you'd never struggle." Tears pricked unexpectedly behind my eyes. "But then life got expensive," he whispered. "And every time you helped us, it felt like relief. Like breathing. Relief." I understood that. Too well. "But relief became dependency," I said gently. He nodded slowly. "I know." And then dependency became entitlement. That one took him longer to answer. Finally, yeah. He looked shattered, admitting it. And maybe that was necessary, because people don't truly change when they're merely embarrassed. They change when denial finally becomes impossible. Ethan swallowed hard before speaking again. "I never wanted to become somebody who used you." The sadness in his voice felt genuine. But genuine sadness doesn't erase damage. "I know," I said softly. "You believe that?" "Yes." He looked surprised. I held his gaze carefully. "But intention doesn't erase consequences." Tears filled his eyes instantly. "I know." For a moment, he looked exactly like the little boy who once cried after accidentally breaking Marcus's toolbox. Not manipulative, not defensive, just ashamed. And God help me. Part of me wanted to comfort him. That's the dangerous thing about motherhood. Even wounded mothers still instinctively reach toward their children. But I stopped myself. Because comforting Ethan too quickly had been my mistake for years. Instead, I asked quietly, "What happens now?" He stared at the table for several seconds. I fix it. How I work more, sell things, deal with the debt. His voice trembled slightly. Whatever it takes. I studied him carefully. For the first time in months, I didn't hear excuses. No blaming Vanessa. No blaming stress. No blaming me. Just consequences. Finally. Then Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out several folded papers. He slid them across the table toward me. I opened them slowly. Budget spreadsheets, debt repayment plans, meeting schedules with financial advisors, even therapy appointments. I blinked up at him in surprise. You started therapy? He gave a weak laugh. Apparently, people who fake their mother's signature have issues. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression turned serious again. I know you probably won't forgive me. The honesty of that sentence mattered more than he realized, because real accountability stops demanding immediate absolution. I don't know yet, I admitted quietly. He nodded slowly. I wouldn't either. We sat quietly after that. Then Ethan whispered something so softly I barely heard it. I called you worthless because I felt worthless. The words hit like a punch straight through my chest. Not because they excused him, because they explained him. So much of Ethan's life suddenly made horrible sense. The overspending, the status obsession, the endless need to appear successful. He wasn't trying to prove something to the world. He was trying to outrun his own self-hatred. But pain past, untreated, eventually spills onto everyone nearby. And I had carried the weight of his unresolved shame for years without realizing it. I looked at my son very carefully before speaking. You need to understand something, Ethan. He nodded silently. You are responsible for your healing now, not me. His eyes filled again. I know. No, I said gently. I don't think you fully do yet. He swallowed hard. I'm trying. This time, I believed him. Not because he sounded convincing, because for once, he sounded humbled. And maybe humility was the first honest thing to enter our relationship in years. Winter arrived quietly along Lake Erie. The first snowfall covered the shoreline in soft white silence, turning everything outside my condo windows into something peaceful and still. I used to hate winter after Marcus died. Cold made grief feel sharper somehow. But this year felt different. Not perfect. Not magically healed. Just lighter. For the first time in almost a decade, my days no longer revolved around managing someone else's emotional emergencies. I woke up when my body wanted to wake up. I painted terrible watercolor landscapes at the community center every Thursday afternoon. I walked the shoreline with Eleanor and the other women from the widows group, while we laughed about bad dates, aching knees, and children who still thought we existed solely to solve problems. And slowly, piece by piece, I started becoming myself again. One morning, Gloria called while I was reorganizing kitchen cabinets. I ran into Ethan, she said carefully. I paused instantly. Oh, he looks rough. I leaned against the counter quietly. How rough, tired, she admitted. But sober, grounded maybe, different. That word stayed with me after we hung up. Different. Over the following months, I began hearing small updates from Mia and Jacob during weekend visits. Dad got a second job. Dad sold the house. Dad moved into an apartment closer to work. Dad cooks spaghetti now, but burns everything. Tiny fragments of a man rebuilding himself from the bottom up. Vanessa continued staying with her mother for a while, though eventually she rented a townhouse nearby, so the children could maintain stability at school. Surprisingly, she and I began speaking more honestly than ever before. One Saturday, while Mia and Jacob watched movies inside, Vanessa stood beside me on the condo balcony, wrapped in one of my spare blankets. Lake wind tossed her blonde hair across her face while she stared silently at the water. Finally, she said quietly, "I blamed you for a long time." I looked at her calmly. "I know." She gave a weak laugh. "I thought you stopping the money was what destroyed everything." And now Vanessa swallowed hard. "Now I think the money was hiding how broken things already were." That was probably the most truthful sentence either of us had spoken in years. She rubbed her hands together against the cold. "I should have stopped him sooner." I appreciated the honesty. But honesty after collapse always arrives carrying regret. "You were trying to survive too," I said gently. Vanessa looked surprised by my kindness, maybe because she expected punishment from me. Truthfully, I was too tired for punishment anymore. I just wanted peace. That evening, after Vanessa left with the children, I sat alone by the window watching snow drift across the parking lot lights. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Cautious, absolutely. But not consumed by rage. That mattered, because rage can keep you alive temporarily, but peace is what helps you rebuild. A few weeks later, Ethan asked if he could visit. Not for money, not for help. Just visit. I almost said no. Not because I hated him. Because trust once shattered rebuilds slowly. Like bone healing after a bad break. Still, I agreed. He arrived carrying a paper grocery bag and looking painfully nervous. "I brought dinner," he said awkwardly. I blinked once. "You cooked technically?" That almost made me smile. Almost. Inside the bag sat takeout containers from an Italian restaurant and a loaf of bakery bread that was still warm. We ate quietly at my small kitchen table overlooking the lake. No tension, no manipulation, no financial discussions, just awkwardness. Oddly enough, the awkwardness felt healthy, because for once, neither of us was pretending. After dinner, Ethan cleared the plates automatically and started washing dishes without being asked. I stood frozen watching him. That simple act nearly made me cry. Not because washing dishes is extraordinary, because entitlement had once made him incapable of noticing work that needed doing. Now, he quietly scrubbed plates while steam rose around him in soft kitchen light. Healing sometimes reveals itself through tiny things. Later that evening, he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "A repayment plan." I stared at him carefully before opening it. Inside sat detailed spreadsheets, monthly budgets, debt balances, projected repayment schedules. Included with everything was a handwritten letter folded neatly in half. I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. Messier than Marcus's, more rushed. I unfolded it slowly. "Mom, I know apologies probably sound meaningless now." Maybe they should. I spent years confusing love with rescue. I kept expecting you to save me from consequences instead of becoming someone capable of facing them. I blamed pressure, stress, debt, work, everything except myself. But the truth is, I became a man who measured people by what they could provide me, including you. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Not just the money. The way I stopped seeing you clearly. You spent years carrying me, while I convinced myself I was standing on my own. I don't expect forgiveness, because I finally understand forgiveness isn't owed. I just want to spend the rest of my life becoming someone Dad would have respected again, and someone worthy of being your son. Love, Ethan. By the time I finished reading, my vision had blurred completely. I folded the letter carefully and looked up at him. Ethan sat rigidly in the chair across from me like a man awaiting judgment. I meant every word he said quietly. I believed him. That was the dangerous part. because believing him did not magically erase everything that happened. Trust isn't rebuilt through emotion, it's rebuilt through consistency, time, humility, accountability repeated quietly over and over again. "I'm glad you wrote this," I said softly. He nodded once. "But I need you to understand something clearly." His shoulders tensed immediately. "I may forgive you someday," I continued carefully. "But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the old relationship." Pain flickered across his face. "Good. Not because I wanted him hurt, because he needed to understand healing doesn't mean erasing consequences." "I know," he whispered. "No more financial dependence." "I know." "No more guilt." "I know." "And no more making me responsible for your emotional stability." That one hit hardest. I saw it in his eyes immediately, because for years I had carried that weight too, without realizing it. Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm trying to learn how to do that myself." Outside the windows, snow continued falling softly across the lake. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan looked at me carefully and asked something that sounded almost childlike. "Do you think Dad would hate me?" The question broke my heart instantly, because beneath all the lies and mistakes still sat a grieving son who never fully learned how to become a man after losing his father. I walked slowly around the table and rested a hand gently against his shoulder. "No," I said softly, "but I think he'd expect more from you now." Ethan lowered his head and cried quietly for the first time since all this began. And this time, I didn't rescue him from it. A year after Ethan called me old and worthless, I invited my family to dinner. Not because everything was magically fixed, not because pain had disappeared, but because healing had finally become possible. There's a difference. The condo looked warm that evening. Soft jazz played quietly from Marcus's old record player, while candlelight flickered across the dining table. Outside, Lake Erie reflected the last gold light of sunset like melted glass. Mia stood beside me in the kitchen, carefully arranging salad into bowls. "Too much dressing?" she asked seriously. I smiled. "You sound exactly like your grandfather." That made her grin. Jacob ran through the living room holding garlic bread like it was a championship trophy. I didn't burn it this time, an achievement worth celebrating. I laughed. The sound surprised me sometimes now. My own laughter. Full, easy, real. For years, joy had felt guilty somehow. Like relaxing meant somebody else might suddenly need something from me. Now peace no longer frightened me. At 6:30, sharp Vanessa arrived carrying a homemade pie. We'd never become best friends. Maybe we never would. But honesty had made us kinder to each other. "You look beautiful," she said quietly while setting the pie on the counter. "So do you." And she did. Lighter somehow. Not because life had become easy, because pretending had finally stopped. A few minutes later, there was another knock at the door. "Ethan." The room shifted slightly when he walked in. Not tense exactly. "Careful." Healing families learn caution before they relearn comfort. He stood holding a small bouquet of yellow tulips and something tucked beneath his arm. An old photo album. Marcus's album. For a second, emotion caught painfully in my throat. "You remembered," I whispered. Ethan nodded quietly. "Dad always liked these flowers." He handed me the tulips awkwardly, almost uncertain whether he still had the right to know things about me anymore. The old Ethan would have walked in expecting immediate emotional reassurance. This Ethan waited quietly instead. And somehow that humility mattered more than grand speeches ever could. Dinner felt strange at first. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Nobody argued, nobody manipulated, nobody performed. We simply ate. Mia talked about school theater auditions. Jacob described a disastrous soccer game in dramatic detail, while Vanessa laughed softly into her wineglass. And Ethan, he mostly listened. That alone nearly broke my heart. Because I realized how long it had been since my son truly listened to anyone, instead of reacting from pressure, shame, or ego. At one point, Jacob accidentally knocked over his water glass. The old Ethan would have snapped instantly from stress. Instead, he calmly grabbed napkins and helped clean the spill without raising his voice once. Tiny moments. Tiny changes. That's what real growth looks like. Not perfection. Consistency. After dinner, everyone drifted naturally toward cleanup without being asked. Vanessa wrapped leftovers while Mia dried dishes beside me. Jacob eventually fell asleep, curled sideways on the couch, with one shoe still on. Some things never change. Ethan quietly carried coffee mugs onto the balcony overlooking the lake. "Thought maybe you'd want one," he said. I accepted the mug silently and stepped outside beside him. Cold evening wind brushed softly against us while waves moved below in the darkness. For a while, we simply stood there. Mother and son. Not fixed, not broken beyond repair either. Just human. Finally, Ethan spoke. I used to think retirement meant giving up. I glanced sideways at him, and now he gave a small, tired smile. Now I think maybe it means finally living. I looked out across the dark water. Marcus would have loved this view. The thought no longer destroyed me the way it once had. Grief changes shape when you stop fighting it. "I owe you something," Ethan said quietly. "You don't owe me money tonight." He shook his head immediately. "Not that." Then he looked directly at me. "I owe you the truth." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. "When Dad died," he continued softly, "I think I started confusing strength with pretending. I stayed silent, so every time I felt scared or behind or ashamed, I covered it with something else. Money, I said gently. Status, spending, control." He swallowed hard, and eventually entitlement. Hearing him say the word himself mattered, because accountability sounds different when nobody forces it out of you. "I convinced myself I deserved your help because life felt unfair," he admitted quietly. "But really, I just didn't know how to face failure." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug for warmth. "The hardest part," Ethan whispered, "is realizing how much I hurt the person who loved me most." Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. Not because the pain vanished, because being truly seen after years of invisibility feels overwhelming. He looked down at the balcony floor before speaking again. "I don't expect you to ever fully trust me again." I answered honestly. "Trust comes back slowly, I know, but it can come back." His eyes lifted toward mine quickly at that. "Hope. Careful hope. The kind built from humility instead of entitlement." Then Ethan said the words I think I'd needed to hear for years. "I want to spend the rest of my life proving I know your worth now." The lake wind moved softly between us. For a moment, I saw flashes of every version of my son all at once. The little boy holding Marcus's hand. The arrogant man drowning in debt and shame. The broken son crying quietly in my kitchen. And now, a man finally learning that love without respect becomes destruction. I reached over slowly and rested my hand against his. "I love you, Ethan." His face crumpled slightly at that. "But listen to me carefully." He nodded immediately. "My life no longer exists to rescue yours." A tear slid silently down his cheek. "I understand." "No," I said gently. "I think now you finally do." Below us, waves crashed softly against the shoreline. Inside the condo, I could hear Mia laughing at something Vanessa said, while Jacob snored lightly on the couch. Life. Messy, wounded, still continuing. I looked out across the dark water and realized something extraordinary. A year ago, I thought losing my role as the family savior would destroy me. Instead, it saved me. Because retiring early and taking my money away was never really about revenge. It was about survival. About remembering that I was still a woman outside motherhood, still a person outside sacrifice, still worthy even when I stopped providing things. And maybe that's the lesson nobody teaches women my age. Often enough, love should never require you to disappear. There's a painful difference between being loved and being relied on. For years, I confused the two. I thought exhaustion meant devotion. I thought sacrifice automatically created gratitude. I believed if I just gave enough money, enough time, enough patience, eventually everyone around me would feel secure and happy. But love built entirely on one person's self-erasure cannot stay healthy forever. Eventually, resentment grows. Dependency grows. And sometimes the people you protect the most slowly forget you are human too. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Helping your family is beautiful. Destroying yourself to keep everyone else comfortable is not. Boundaries are not cruelty. Rest is not selfishness. And your worth does not disappear the moment you stop solving problems for other people. It took me 62 years to understand that I was allowed to have peace too. Allowed to say no. Allowed to stop rescuing people who refuse to rescue themselves. Most importantly, I learned something about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not pretending nothing happened. It's choosing not to let pain harden your heart forever, while still honoring the lessons pain taught you. Ethan and I may never return to who we once were. But honestly, maybe that's okay, because sometimes relationships only begin healing after illusions finally die. And sometimes the strongest thing a mother can do is step back far enough for her child to finally grow up. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever felt taken for granted by someone you loved deeply or struggled to set boundaries with family? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter too. And if you enjoyed this journey with Londyn and her family, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love reading your messages and knowing we're sharing these moments together from all around the world.